Welcome to Creation in the 21st Century. I'm your host, Carl Baugh, founder and director of the Creation Evidence Museum in Glen Rose, Texas. The title to today's program is Smoking Guns and Magic Bullets. Now, is there evidence of smoking guns that would actually destroy the very theory of evolution on which our academic profile is based in this generation? Yes, there are. You need the information in this program. Call a friend. Tell them they need to hear this program, Smoking Guns and Magic Bullets. When we talk about evolutionary theory, we have to define the concepts. For instance, in a number of the technical publications, evidence for macroevolution, that is, evolution from molecule to man, the concept that everything developed from rocks, from inorganic chemistry, to living systems and progressed all the way to where we are today, that is macroevolution in concept. There is no basis ever, in fact, for that. In fact, you're going to find on this program today some smoking guns that actually destroyed. And these smoking guns are found in the geologic record, in the scientific record, in the math calculations. Now, when we talk about microevolution, that is variation within genetic boundary, where actually we lose genetic information rather than gain genetic information, much of the technical literature fudges. The scholars are not totally honest with the public or with their colleagues. They use variation within a genetic boundary that can change with ecospheric change, and thus they interpret that as macroevolution, evolution from molecule to higher forms, ultimately to man. So thus we've defined our terms, and now let's get to the very issues themselves. Are there smoking guns to destroy that actually do destroy evolutionary theory? Well, the concept of evolution is illustrated here in this Tower of Time from the National Museum of Natural History in Washington, D.C. And it begins with the concept of early bacterial formation some 3.5 billion years ago, developing ultimately into creatures like the jellyfish, the trilobites, and then crustaceans, and then turtles and sharks, and closing with this Carboniferous period of the Paleozoic era. Now, don't let those names throw you. It's the dim, distant past, the developing Paleozoic era, which introduced then, according to evolutionary theory, the Mesozoic era, the era of the reptiles and the dinosaurs, which then introduced the Cenozoic era, the era of mammals, ultimately progressing to man. So thus we have evolutionary theory imagining the development of living systems all the way through evolutionary time until the present. But remember, these data, this column, only exists in the mind of the evolutionist and in the illustrations of his texts. It does not exist anywhere on planet Earth. Now, we do have the fossil record showing evidence of reptiles and of mammals, of conifers, of material here, the crustaceans, and of jellyfish. We have many of these living systems extant today. We have in the geologic record these various things, but we do not have in the geologic record a progression from the supposed earliest to the next, developing to the next and to the next. In fact, quite often you have them juxtapositioned one on top of the other. Lyell to the present, who have envisioned a progression of these living systems over long geologic ages. Is there a smoking gun? Yes. In the geologic record itself, envisioned by the evolutionary community, is a phenomenon that is present worldwide, yet is not even found in the geologic text. As a rule, one of our former colleagues, who is now with the Creator himself, spent years searching through the 5th largest library in the world and never found one reference to this phenomenon, this smoking gun. What is it? Polystrate fossils. What on earth is a polystrate fossil? That is a fossil that runs from one strata up to another strata, often through that strata, through another strata. For instance, here we have near Cookeville, Tennessee, this fossil tree. But notice it has the bulbous section of the roots, but the roots have been sheared off. It has no branches or leaves, but it is a tree. The bulbous section of the roots is in coal, and it is coalified, meaning it was in place when that coal was formed. Then it has sandstone, and where it has sandstone adjacent, it is sandstone. It has more coal, it's coal again. More sandstone, more coal, limestone, more coal. That polystrate fossil runs through more than 5 million years of supposed evolutionary time and layers. Now that's a smoking gun. By the very geologist and paleontologist who interpret the fossil record and the rocks themselves, the smoking gun is that here is a tree that could not have remained in place 5 million years, where the storms and the weathering and the formation of new sedimentation overrode that and accumulated around it. Instead, this smoking gun indicates that it was waterborne, and when a tree becomes waterlogged, especially if the branches and the leaves are sheared off, the bulbous section becomes much heavier. That tree, if waterborne, turns upright, is carried, and is often placed stationary in that position. So this smoking gun, by the geologists found themselves, actually points to a flood that encompassed the material in a few short days or weeks that normally is interpreted to have encompassed 5 million years of time. And is this smoking gun an exception? No. The title of the program is Smoking Guns and Magic Bullets. In every single layer of the fossil record, polystrate fossils have been found. I was excavating at Glen Rose, and Nova was filming over my shoulder. And as Nova was filming over my shoulder, we discovered, my colleagues and I discovered, a polystrate fossil, a lepidodendron root and tree trunk system. It had been impressed into 5 inches of the layer beneath, ran through the clay, up through the layer above, a polystrate fossil. And Nova was filming over my shoulder as we excavated that polystrate fossil. Many more have been found in the Cretaceous in which we work. All of the sedimentary deposits worldwide have polystrate fossils, yet they're not even mentioned in the geologic text. These polystrate fossils interlace all of these layers as smoking guns. Now let's find another smoking gun. And it is this one, a Cretaceous limestone layer that we excavate in at Glen Rose, Texas. Here, this layer is seen as one of our fine geologists, Dr. Don Patton, is standing beside it. This is in Israel. Now let me explain the significance of that limestone layer. That limestone layer has various fossils by the billions. It has certain clams. It has certain marine fossils, has certain dinosaur fossils that, according to evolution, are assigned an age from 140 million years ago to 64 million years before present. And in the Glen Rose area, it's assigned an age of about 110 million years. Now, you understand I said assigned these ages. Assigned these ages simply because, assuming that simple living systems developed more complex living systems, to more complex living systems, then you place on that shelf that layer with its fossils and then assign it that age, so it's simply assumed. This layer was first cataloged and scientifically described near Austin, Texas. So it's very white, and it's called the Austin chalk. Not because it's chalky, it's very, very hard, but it's called the Austin chalk because it's very white, and it was found near Austin, Texas. World-class geologist and geophysicist, the late Dr. Derek Egger, an agnostic in his approach to creation versus evolution, visited me at Glen Rose while he was compiling this evidence. He later published a major work called The Nature of the Stratigraphic Record. And in that, Dr. Derek Egger admitted that this layer, first cataloged near Austin, Texas, runs 1,600 miles to the eastern seaboard of the United States, picks up again at the White Cliffs of Dover, runs throughout Europe, throughout Russia, throughout China, runs throughout Israel, where it is now found, demonstrated here, runs throughout Africa, back to the United States. It runs north from Texas throughout Canada, runs south throughout Central and South America, runs west past the Rockies all the way to the west coast, picks up again on the continent of Australia. This is a global sedimentary deposit. Sedimentary deposit? Sedimentary deposits are laid down under water in motion. So we have a global sedimentary deposit indicating that since it's all connected together, this global deposit had to be laid down by a global flood. So we have literally demonstrated here a smoking gun called the Austin Chalk Cretaceous layer. That smoking gun is incredibly important because it destroys the evolutionary basis for long geologic ages to form that Cretaceous layer. Now, is there another smoking gun? Yes, there is. What about star formation for our astronomers? Astronomers estimate that there are about 100 billion galaxies. Now, this is being very conservative. This is one way of putting the data together, but this is being very conservative in favor of the evolutionary astronomer and astrophysicist. Actually, some of the data show that there are 225 billion galaxies, each comprised of over 500 million stars. But let's use a more conservative figure to give the hand and the opportunity and the slant toward the evolutionist himself. Watch closely. If there are 100 billion galaxies, they, the astronomers and astrophysicists, estimate that there are 200 billion stars per galaxy. Astronomers claim the universe is 20 billion years old. That's 6.3 times 10 to the 17th power of seconds in those 20 billion years. Now, don't want to lose you in the math. Watch closely. If you divide 20 billion years into seconds, you get 6.3 times 10 to the 17th power of seconds in the universe. Now, let's do the math of star formation. 100 billion galaxies times 200 billion stars in each galaxy gives us 2 times 10 to the 22nd power of stars. Dividing all of those stars by the number of seconds, 6.3 times 10 to the 17th power of seconds in the 20 billion years, equals 3 times 1746 times 10 to the 4th power, or 31,746 stars per second would have to have been formed throughout the history of the universe in 20 billion years, if those 20 billion years existed. The point is, we have never seen even one star form, but we have seen them die. Genesis 1:16, He made the stars also. The math is a smoking gun screaming loudly that it cannot be. It destroys the calculations that are assumed to have formed the entire universe. Plus, astronomers and astrophysicists have found that these star and galactic formations are not simply spread throughout the universe. They're found in concentric rings of galaxies around our Milky Way galaxy and our solar system. We're at or near the center of the whole setup. There is no way this could have formed. It's a smoking gun. In evolutionary theory, they just haven't followed through with the math. Smoking guns, there are more. When we get closer to planet Earth, we find, looking at this evidence in the geologic record, we find a marvelous amount of data that, again, destroys evolutionary theory. Now, let's talk about this at length. These data normally have to do with the public concept of carbon-14. It's known in general that carbon-14 is radioactive. Carbon-12 and carbon-13 are the normal carbon atoms. They are not radioactive. But carbon-14 is radioactive. That is, it loses mass over a period of time. After 7.5 lives, all of the carbon-14 is gone. In fact, with all radioisotopes, all radioactive elements, after 7.5 lives, all measurable amounts of that radioactive material are dissipated. So back to carbon-14. Carbon-12 and carbon-13 are the normal carbon atoms. Carbon-14 is generated artificially as ultraviolet radiation strikes the upper atmosphere, strikes nitrogen, a chain reaction sets in, ultimately producing carbon-14, which filters down. It's assimilated by the plants. The plants are assimilated by the animals. We assimilate the plants and the animals, and thus living systems outside the ocean have a considerable amount of carbon-14. So after 7.5 lives, even theoretically, after 5,700 years of a normal half-life of carbon-14, you multiply that by 7, and that gives only a few decades at most, even under normal conditions. Even discounting the fact that prior to the flood of Noah's day, we had a canopy above the earth. And that canopy filtered out all, or essentially all, most of, the ultraviolet radiation. Thus, we would have had very little, if any, carbon-14 formed. So if you have something that is deposited around the time of the flood, it would have had very little carbon-14 generated. That does not mean that it is extremely old if it has very little carbon-14 in it. It simply means it was deposited around the time of Noah's flood, or around the time when there was a filter filtering out the ultraviolet radiation, the massive amounts of the ultraviolet radiation. Now watch this. Conventional carbon-14 laboratories have been aware of an anomaly: too much carbon-14 in deep geologic strata. They found carbon-14 in coal that's supposed to be 295 million years old. Now, did you get that? After just a few decades, even if we discount the fact of the canopy and forget all about the creation model, let's just deal with the facts as they are, and as they are approached with the standard conventional laboratories and the evolutionary concept. We have found, or they have found, and we've actually sent to laboratories some of the data, carbon-14 has been found in coal that's supposed to be 295 million years old, then coal that has been found in the Cretaceous layer that's supposed to be 110 million years old. 110 million? What's it doing with coal in it if it's 110 million years old? And if it's 295 million years old, what's it doing with coal with carbon-14 in it? So they have a major problem. This is a smoking gun that must be addressed. Well, let's let the gun be fired. Watch closely. Too much carbon-14 in deep geologic strata. Conventional carbon-14 laboratories have been aware of this anomaly since the early 1980s, and they've striven to eliminate it and are unable to account for it. Lately, the world's best such laboratory, which has learned during 2 decades of low carbon-14 measurements how not to contaminate specimens externally so the measurements are absolutely accurate. Under contract to creationists who wanted to know the material, it was confirmed that such observations for coal samples and even for a dozen diamonds which cannot be contaminated in situ with recent carbon, these constitute very strong evidence that the Earth is only thousands, not billions of years old. Now let me explain that again. Not only in coal that's supposed to be 295 million years old, but now in diamonds with no possibility of external contamination by recent carbon. In diamonds, they've found at least a dozen samples of carbon-14. How do we explain this with the facts? It's a smoking gun. It shoots evolution and levels it to the floor. Macroevolution, long ages of disruption. How do we explain that? The top of this program was listed as smoking guns and magic bullets. Well, it's the creation model that explains this. You see, originally, in the created planet Earth, and the background, the beautiful symphonic universe supporting it, the Earth had a controlled nuclear reactor. It was internal. It had an electromagnetic field that was sufficient. And it also had the water in that canopy above the Earth compressed and energized to the point where much of the hydrogen bonded into a crystalline lattice. One of the areas where even among my creationist friends I've been critiqued is that I hold to the literal statement in the Hebrew that that firmamental canopy, very thin, microscopically thin firmamental canopy above the Earth, was crystalline in nature. Well, we now have a canopy there that is an ozone canopy with a bit of water vapor. But when you add the intense electromagnetic field that was in existence in the past, it's been dissipating since, with water vapor, when you have this, some Korean scientists within the last few months published in the technical literature the fact that they had taken water vapor and they had added an intense electromagnetic field, a magnetic field no more intense than we experience when we walk across a rug and scrape our leather sole shoes on it. With that amount of energy, they've been able to bond the hydrogen into a crystalline lattice. So we've got a magic bullet here. Smoking guns, but magic bullets that redeem the situation, that remedy the problem. The remedy to the problem is not found in evolutionary theory, but is found in the creation model itself. For prior to the flood, most of the ultraviolet would have been filtered out. Then we had the flood, and then we had the days of Peleg after the flood, when the earth expanded, and you have many of these forces crashing in on continental plates so that you get the pressure and the heat sufficient to form diamonds. Under those conditions, now with some carbon-14 generated, minuscule amounts, you have enough of a context to explain how the carbon-14, now with some formation because we lost that firmamental canopy, carbon-14 could have begun to form and could have been compressed within the context of the diamonds, and thus we have a magic bullet to explain and remedy the context. Thus, if evolution has been destroyed in its basic thesis, creation becomes more viable than ever, academically, scientifically. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Revelation chapter 4, verse 11 states, "Thou art worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and honor and power, for thou hast created all things, and for thy pleasure they are and were created." Since the Creator did it, He then walked our streets, sat in our councils, loved our homes and our families. Since the Creator is the answer, He then provided a remedy for our deepest problem. He went to Calvary. He died. He was buried. He rose again the third day and is now alive, knocking at your heart's door. Wouldn't you just open your heart's door to Him? And right now, just pray this simple prayer. Just pray this simple prayer with me. Dear God, I'm a sinner. There's evidence to show that You created all things, and I want You in my heart. Lord Jesus, right now, I open my heart to You. Come in right now. Cover me with Your blood. Save me, and I will live for You with all my heart. If you prayed that simple prayer, many things become apparently true and transparently honest. Welcome home to truth.
Creation in the 21st Century has been sponsored by Trinity Broadcasting Network, and only with your love gift of support can this program stay on the air. So write to Creation in the 21st Century, P.O. Box A, Santa Ana, California, 92711.
The only pity party I'm going to be at is where there are only two guests, me and Jesus Christ. Because the only one I want to tell, oh yes, say amen somebody, the only one I want to tell, Lord, what's up with this, is Jesus, because He's the only one